assuming this is, hey John, I'm assuming this is one where people can't ask questions, but I don't out loud, but I don't know. Just playing with the controls real quick to get an idea of what's going on. Hi, Valerie. You guys hear me okay? That's good. Let's see. People could just go ahead and ask questions in the chat too. And that way everybody could do it. So maybe that's better. This is my You Can't Scare Me, I'm a Horror Writer mug. I don't know if it's displaying the right way or not. It looks backwards on my screen, but all right. Sounds good, Carol. So I'll wait just another minute or two. Does anybody have any questions while we're hanging out? I've got to warn you, my little dogs are in here. They might make a noise. We'll see. Oh, they're kind of sleeping. I was going to pick one up to show you. But there she is. Ready to come up on her. Oh, you gonna come over, Lucy? Come here. This is my very old dog, Lucy. Say hi. Who will never give me kisses. I don't think she likes my beard. Oh, hold on, Bentley. No, come here. Come here. You have to come here. We're not going anywhere. This is the younger dog, Bentley, who will give me kisses. He doesn't seem to care. Okay, go lie down. So if you hear him bark, I'll do a mute. Hopefully they won't. Usually there's somebody here to watch them, but I'm the only person here today. All right, so I guess if somebody wants to come on screen. So I approve them. I guess I'll get a message, some kind of like pop-up or something. Okay. And I think I can share my screen okay. You see who's here right now. Looks like there's 9 of you. Like I said a minute ago, I'm Sally. I'm going to wait just another minute to get started in case other people are going to show up here. And then since it's only an hour, I'm going to try to end maybe a little early in case you have questions. But even though this thing's a PowerPoint that I can march through step by step, I would prefer that you ask questions anytime you have them. I'll keep an eye on the chat as we go along. I think if I'm sharing the screen, a new chat message will just pop up by itself. I should be able to see them. I would rather answer your questions or respond to your needs than just march through a PowerPoint that, quite frankly, I can send to any of you too. So if you want the PowerPoint, here's my email. No typos. So if you email me after the session, I'll be glad to send it to you. That way you don't have to take notes or anything if you don't want to. Or like notes on the actual text I have on the PowerPoint. You can write down anything else you want, of course. All right, does anybody have any questions before we get started? Thanks, Kenya. These are all the pops. They're all in here because my wife hates them. She hates their creepy black eyes, so they all have to stay here. And that's okay. Honestly, as time goes by, they're starting to seem creepier to me too. There's so many of them. And you just sort of notice all the black eyes and not their faces or their bodies. It's just all the black eyes. Sorta, kinda. It's the flat, lifeless black of their eyes that get you. But that's all right. All right, I might as well go ahead and get started. If people wander on in, then they can go ahead and catch up. So I'm Tim Waggoner, for those of you who don't know. Published about 50 or so books, all traditionally published, usually dark fantasy, horror, media tie-in stuff. 7 collections of short fiction. Been teaching for about 30 years or so. Right now, for the last 20 something years, I've been a professor at Sinclair Community College in Dayton, Ohio, teach composition and creative writing. And let's see, since John was here, I have a wonderful book on how to write horror that John and Jennifer at Raw Dog put out. They did such a wonderful job with it. It's called Writing in the Dark. So I'll make John happy by plugging that. Also, if you go to, I don't know if I haven't visited it. I don't know if I set it up right or not, but I got a little store here that links to my Amazon page, but you don't need to go there to do this. I'm going to go ahead and do a drawing for another writing book I have. It's called Writing Genre Fiction. It's a book I co-wrote with Michael Nost. We just have the different chapters cover all kinds of different things, but I'm going to give away maybe 3 copies. I've got a lot of them, so maybe I'll give away 3 copies. All I got to do is email me, and I'll put all the names in a little hat. I'll put them in this hat, and then I'll go ahead and draw them. So if you just got my email address from where I put it earlier, you don't even have to go visit my store if you don't want to. Right, so today's session is done to death. It's about, I got to figure out how to share the screen here. It's about avoiding cliches in horror and dark fantasy. All right, so hopefully I'll be sharing it now. This is sharing's a little bit different than Zoom. All right, so it says it's sharing a window. So somebody send me a message to tell me if you can see where it says done to death. And that way I'll see if your message pops up on my screen right now too. Don't see a message. Can I hide it? There we go. That's weird. So, okay, everybody sees it. I got like a little split screen now. I wonder if I can move things on here. All right, what if I do this? So let's see. Yes. All right, you should see the first screen. This is the kind of stuff teachers get super excited about. Learn how to work technologies. Hopefully you see a screen that says for your consideration. If you don't, let me know. I got to do a little finagling back and forth here to move the screen. But this way I see the chat, I see myself, I see the screen. So if you show you in presentation mode, I don't even know what that means. I could do this. Yeah, but that gets rid of the chat. This is fine. As long as the screen's big enough for you to read, that's all that really matters. Oh, no, you're fine. I'm just happy I get this far. So what we're talking about is the idea of, how to avoid cliches when you write horror and dark fantasy. And this screen just talks about genre and tropes and things like that. But one of the things about a genre, it's a French word that means kind or type. And the idea is that there's a shared body of images, characters, story ideas, styles, feelings, atmosphere, whatever. There's like a great big shared, toolbox full of all kinds of stuff. And this toolbox is labeled fantasy, it's labeled science fiction, it's labeled horror. And of course, some of the tools are, you might find a screwdriver in one toolbox and also find it in another. But in general, if you're going to be working in a particular genre, you tend to deal with these particular tools. That, in a sense, if you want to get really technical, all genre fiction is kind of like tie-in fiction, because you are tying into stuff that is gone before you. It's just that at this point, we're copying things that nobody owns. Like, who owns the idea of a robot? Who owns the idea of faster than light drive? So if they're not literally public domain, it's kind of like common knowledge when it comes to research. Nobody owns the day Pearl Harbor was bombed. So even if you look it up, you don't have to give credit to that source. Nobody owns that information. So this is something, all these tropes and everything else are just owned by a culture, owned by individuals, or not owned by anybody. We're all free to use them. So when you write genre fiction, you get into a really weird kind of space where, do you give people what they want? You probably can't, because if they like one book, they would just read that one book over and over again. They want a similar experience, but they also want newness. Like, if they got to an end of a book and they could erase their memory and reread again, they could have the experience over again. So they would do that. So, the old publishing cliche of, what do publishers want? They want more of the same, only different. And so you have to find ways to do that. And the question is, how different do you want to be? Some genre conventions are like locked in stone, like in category romance, commercial romance, it's the happily ever after ending, or at least happily for now. They've kind of amended it sometimes for that. But it's the same idea, a happy ending. You got to have that for that kind of genre. So what happens though with things like Faster Than Light Drive or robots or vampires or the brooding romantic hero or whatever, the genius detective, is that the more these things get used, it's kind of like the old days when photocopiers couldn't adjust images. So if you do a copy of a copy of a copy, the image would degrade over time. And that's what happens here with genres, is that the more vampires are used, the more werewolves are used, the more robots are used or zombies or whatever, the less effective they are. They'll always still be effective for a new reader. So a new reader coming up the first time, he or she, however young they are, can read a werewolf story. Maybe it's like a Goosebumps type thing, pretty mild werewolf type story. They may be super excited by this trope because it's brand new to them. Somebody who's read 1,000 werewolf stories, probably one more that's the same is not going to do much for them. So you have to think about that too. You have to think about, in terms of your audience, what are the odds that they've run into this before? And then you have to decide, when does this start becoming a cliche? And this is something that you can decide for yourself. In general, when we're talking about horror, one of the things about horror is that it depends on the unknown. It depends on people not being able to guess what's happening. Sorry, hold on for a second. Hush you, dogs. My wife promised she wouldn't come home during my session, and it's obvious she has forgotten. She also messaged me that she had a migraine. Maybe she's just going to come home and take the dogs into the bedroom. So you might hear them whining for a couple minutes. Hopefully they won't bark again. So in terms of horror, horror is like a surprise. We dread what's coming up. We fear the unknown. But if you already know what a vampire is and how a vampire works and how to defeat a vampire, there's not a whole lot unknown about them. I mean, yeah, they still may be a threat, but they're a threat the same way that, somebody who wants to rob you is. I mean, they got more tools. They got more, abilities. They're more dangerous, but they're not unknown. And so you want to be careful when a trope becomes that way. So you really have to decide for yourself, when does familiarity become over familiarity? One of the things, I can't claim to be an expert in this because it's just one of the, hold on, I'm going to let my dogs out and hope my wife's out there somewhere. All right, sorry about that. If you hear them barking, it's because they're barking at the door, hoping she'll come in. One of the things I've noticed with a lot of self-published fiction when I cruise through it is that it seems like they really do follow genre expectations more. I don't see, and this just may be me from my cruising through looking at descriptions on Amazon, just to kind of get a sense of what's going on. But it seems like that there's an awful lot of recognizable genre tropes. So for those of you who self-publish, that might be a bigger consideration in terms of familiarity. For people traditionally publishing, if a publisher already has a number of ghost stories that they publish throughout the course of a year, they're probably going to be wanting to look for something different along with the overall amount of ghost stories that they have. It's very different than an individual author who's just putting out his or her own work, because the publishers have to think about everything that they're putting out. They want a variety. So if you're selling only one type, like you have a fast food joint, but you sell one sandwich, you don't have to worry. The one sandwich you want to get, something somebody wants. But if you're a restaurant, you have a variety of menu items because you have more, I don't know. My analogy's falling apart here. But the idea is that you might need to stand out in a different way than it might be necessary or even desirable in self-publishing. So this whole thing about finding balance is something that you'll have to, try to do on your own. I will say that if you do too far, like you go too far away from everyday tropes or common tropes or whatever, you might be making your audience smaller in some ways too. If your fiction is seen as weird or strange or bizarre, some people may seek it out because of that, but other people, they often read genre fiction for comfort. And they don't get comfort if they have to work too hard or if they can't kind of connect, work hard to understand because it's new. They don't know what's going on. They got to pay more attention in terms of the way they read. They can't just blaze through it fast for relaxation. And they don't get the comfort of the familiar. So, some people read for novelty and some people read for the familiar. So a lot of all this, you have to decide on your own. The rest of this workshop is about how, to avoid cliches or how to work with normal kind of everyday tropes so that they don't seem quite so normal. But that decision is not one that anybody can make for you. And you might play around with it. Playing around with it in short fiction can work pretty well. Let's see. Here, now you should see like a sort of a shadowy person behind a screen with a hand on the screen. Should say cliche in horror and dark fantasy. So short stories are a good place to kind of workshop this sort of stuff. It's like R&D, research and development, where you can play around with different tropes and see how people take to it. Plus, people are more willing to experiment for the course of a short story than they are for the course of a novel. I mean, readers, not just writers. I mean, readers. How much time does it take to read a short story? And if it's weird or strange or it doesn't quite give them what they're looking for, so what? They move on to the next one. If it's a great big book, they're a little less likely to persist if it doesn't give them what they want. So you might experiment with short fiction and see. If you're self-published, you might experiment with shorter novels or novellas to see, what kind of impact writing something that's maybe less familiar. At any rate, so I already told you about this part, that horror is based on the fear of the unknown, but anything becomes too known, loses its impact. And I would say especially in horror and dark fantasy. There's a certain amount of familiarity some horror readers want, but there's also an awful lot of, we want surprise, we want something different, we want something that if it doesn't literally scare you, because we all know we're reading, and most of us don't get, literally scared. Some do. Their imaginations are just that kind of automatic. They can't help it. But most of us, we have a distance from when we read. But we want something that is going to stimulate our imaginations other than one more damn zombie apocalypse, even if you like a zombie apocalypse. I guess, Carol, that's kind of up to you. I notice sometimes that I do that, and I don't worry about it from a short story to a longer work, usually because I'll probably develop it differently or in more detail than in a longer work. I wrote a short story for the International Association of Media Tie-In Writers, put out a charity anthology called Tied In, and it was all tied into public domain characters. So technically it's not a tie-in, because tie-in is when somebody owns the rights and they license you to write it. So like doing a Star Trek book. But it's as close as you could do without for that kind of anthology. So I took Her and the Hunter. I made a big list. And I took Her and the Hunter and I turned Her and the Hunter into kind of like a supernatural hero, like in the series Supernatural, going after creatures in the wild. And I like that idea so much that I used it in a novel. It's not the same. It's just the concept of the wild. Some things I worked out for that short story. Otherwise, they're very different. And in my mind, maybe they take place in the same kind of universe, but they're very different types of stories. If you have somebody who's following your work that closely, that's wonderful. They really are following your short stories and your books. You can sometimes get a reader that thinks you're plagiarizing. In research writing, they call that self-plagiarism, when you use your own work and pretend it's new work. That's in school, though, because you're getting new credit. So you should be doing new work, is the theory. I don't think you can, when it comes to fiction and stuff, I don't think you can steal from yourself. I think you can take something and rework it and use it again. It'd be like being a painter and not allowed to use a certain shade of blue because you used it last time. So I don't think it's that big of an issue. And a lot of people purposely take short stories or novellas, develop them into novels. Lucy Snyder's doing that right now. She's doing a novel for Nightfire. I want to say Torfire, for Nightfire. That's an expansion of one of her short stories, I believe. So there's a long tradition of it being, an okay thing. I'm getting the hang of moving. So I love this thing. You've probably seen this meme before. I love it because it is a trope of the haunted house because it says not haunted. So it's totally not haunted. But it's also implies something different with the trope here because somebody's selling a haunted house or trying to sell a haunted house or a not haunted house. So a trope, I'm not sure where the word came from. I remember when people started using it about 10 years ago. And I was like, where the hell does this word come from? But now people use it all the time, so you're probably familiar with what it is. It's just anything that's repeated enough. And it's something that can, because in the trope can be a story structure too. A lot of times people will think that it's a character image or a setting, like the Misty Moors in England is a setting. And it's a trope. Victorian London with all the fog. But it can also be story types. Like, everything looks like it's lost and then the hero rallies and saves the day, which happens an awful lot. And it's really common in movies. It's usually the end of Act 2 where the hero in a movie, where the hero is at his or her worst state and something is, gives them the courage and energy to go on. And that starts Act 3 where they finally get a chance to solve the problem or try to. So a trope, like a robot, is just a trope. A robot that is becoming human is a cliche. If you think about it, I mean, that's what, not the actual legend or folklore story of Pinocchio, because I don't think he ever changed, but in the Disney movie, becomes more human. That's what he wants. In A Million Robots After Pinocchio, robots and androids have wanted to be human. The robot uprising, where the robots are really going to, they're evil and they're going to take over everything. That's a cliche because they've been done so often. So one of the things, if you're investigating a trope, something you like, that you like to work with, one of the things you want to do is ask yourself, what the hell's been done with this before? You can even just do a simple Google search where you type things like, robot, trope, cliche, and see what comes up, where there might be a big list, or just in your genre, horror cliches, science fiction cliches, romance cliches. So you can see what's been done a million times. And a lot of times those can be great idea generating. I guess just ideas, because you can go ahead and say, oh, this has been done. So now I can kind of flip it on its head or try it this way or try it that way. And people will think, oh, it's so different. Short story I sold a long time ago, one of the first ones I sold. So we're talking probably 30 years or more. Yeah, I think 30 years or more. That I sold was about the only mirror that a vampire can see itself in. It's the only mirror that reflects darkness so they can see themselves. And what vampires will do for a chance to see themselves. Again, all I did was take the idea that vampires can't be seen in a mirror and just flip it around and get a story out of it. So, if you have any questions, ask them along the way. Carol asked one, but nobody else has yet. So, okay. So now you should see a monster under the bed trying to grab. I think they're blocks because the screen's small on mine. So, what I usually tell people, titled A Mirror Story, you probably won't find it anywhere. I've never collected it because it's, I wrote it a long time ago. It's called Alacrity Spectatorium. Dr. Alacrity was like a carnival barker guy who his spectatorium was just this tent with a mirror in it, and his only customers were vampires. I wanted it to sound a little bit like a Ray Bradbury kind of thing. But I've never collected. I don't even have a copy. Well, I have a copy of the magazine, but I don't have like the text anywhere on a file at this point. So I usually tell people, if you've seen something in any kind of media, book, movie, TV show, video game, don't use it the same way unless you do something else with it. Now, at its core, you could be using the trope, but you could be reworking it or disguising it or breathing fresh life into it. I haven't read these books, but there is a series. I think the character's nickname is Q, maybe because of his name, but he's I don't know how old he is. I have the impression he's young, like in his 20s, but he's a person who's grown up in the inner city, African American, and he is the genius detective. And he comes from a background where most people, you know, just due to cultural racism and I don't want to say prejudice, but just expectation of, you know, that smart people come from money probably, or at least a certain amount of money in terms of their education. Um, so it's still, you know, Genius Detective, but different kind of a background maybe, and maybe making some good comments on race and our culture too. Always meant to read them, but I haven't got to them yet. So this doesn't mean you can't use it at all, but it does mean that you should be wary of using a trope that is, you know, one that you've encountered, especially if you start seeing it in kid stuff, because everything kind of trickles down. You know, something will be like in a brand new kind of work for adults that's really, you know, cutting edge. And then in about 3 years, it shows up as like, you know, some kind of cartoon or a Muppet or something. And, or if you see it parodied, because if there's, especially in horror, if something is really effective or scary, people will rush as fast as they can to defang it so that image is not scary anymore. And so that's why as soon as like the last iteration of it came out, people were making Pennywise into, you know, dolls and this and memes and that. It's like because he creeped them out a lot, and so they are rushing to take the power away from that. It's why Cthulhu's a plushie. It's these things happen all the time. So if you start seeing parodies of these things like in cartoons, then you know they've lost their power, just as they are. You know, you can come up with other ways, which we're going to talk about, but all right, so here's put a new spin on old tropes. This image, since I have put it in this PowerPoint, I've actually seen it twice in movies. One time I saw it in a movie, I can't remember the name of the damn movie. I also saw it in a movie called Room 6. I think that's where I saw it. No, I take that back. It was a movie my wife and I are watching. No, it was on TV. It was on Evil. It was one of the episodes of Evil where somebody painted something that looked like this. I think he gave it wings too. So people be stealing this, looks like. I don't know if the artist is given permission, but I thought this was really cool because this looks very, very original, but it's just like a creepy thing. It's just like a demon or, you know, bizarre monster. The trope itself is nothing, but it's the execution of it that makes it so awesome. So one of the things you can do is deconstruct tropes. So you can kind of get to the core of a trope. So if you take a vampire, and so you look at them and what do? They got lots to them. But the core thing that makes a vampire is subsisting off the life force, you know, usually blood, but as long as you're subsisting, draining life from something to keep yourself alive, um, you get to be a vampire. Being immortal just doesn't do it because there's lots like, you know, gods can be immortal, you know, whatever. Being undead doesn't matter. I mean, there are ghosts, there are zombies. The only thing that makes a vampire for sure is draining life from others. So once you get down to the core of that, you can go ahead and say, okay, it's something that drains from others. What could it drain besides life? Maybe it drains memories. Maybe it drains an identity. So the more it drains, the more it becomes you, and the less you become anything. Or maybe you swap. That's kind of its, you know, its curse. Once it drains you, it takes over your life, and it's free. But now you've got the curse, and you have to go pass it on to somebody else. It's like a relay race, kind of. Or everybody's passing the baton or hot potato. No, nobody wants the hot potato. So you can just very quickly deconstruct a trope. It's one of the things I do. I don't know if I do it here. I can't control it here. I'll have to look, see if we do it. But in Writing in the Dark, I have a whole bunch of like, get down at these tropes. Well, good. I'm glad that worked for you, Christina. I have a lot, like a list of all kinds of different horror tropes that you can build up from. But really, you can just do it on your own, just knowing. Using tropes from other cultures, be careful you don't use them whole cloth, especially if it's a religion they still, somebody practices. A long time ago, I was using the goddess Kali in a proposal for something I've never written, other than a few sample chapters. And a few years later, I was like, holy shit, that's like that's part of somebody's actual religion. I don't want to do that. Besides, I'm locked into that bizarre, beyond just, you know, taking something and maybe using it inappropriately. So I just made up, you know, something else that fit that fit the purpose of kind of a death goddess. That's all I needed was a death goddess for that thing. So if you go far enough back into myth, I don't think that it's, counts as like appropriating necessarily. Um, Especially if famous myths like Norse myths and Greek myths that have permeated around the world, maybe. Um, but if you do go to other cultures, all you got to do is take like images, but repackage them. Maybe take little bits and pieces of two or three and put together. So you can still be inspired by other cultures, but I wouldn't literally do something like a lot of the horror novels in the 70s were like, oh, here's the Graham Masterton's The Manitou, and it was, Native American spirit kind of meets 20th century technology. Not the kind of thing you'd probably do today with more of awareness of not wanting to loot another culture, but you can certainly find inspiration from them. One of my favorite vampires from another culture, I can't remember the name of it. It's a Eastern vampire, but it's one where the head detaches from the body and it flies around to look for blood, but it takes all its organs with it. So for some reason, so all the organs just drag along this head as it goes flying through the air. I just think that's hysterical. There was another one, the vampire, I think it's supposed to be a woman all the time, but whatever. The vampire drinks blood through a small hole in the back of their neck. And I always try to imagine how the hell do they put their neck back to. You'd think you'd be able to get away from somebody like that pretty easily. You can find analogues of tropes. So if you want to find something where, if like the werewolf trope is that there's a bestial side to people, in the 80s and 90s, that's what serial killers were used for. I wouldn't put Hannibal Lecter down as a werewolf. I'd put him down more as like Dracula, because he's like at a veneer of education and ability and civility over this monster inside him. Even the way he looks on the screen, they have his hair swept back when Anthony Hopkins plays him, kind of like he's Bela Lugosi a little bit. But Norman from Psycho would count as a werewolf. Anybody with a dual personality that maybe they didn't know about, or just pretended to be one thing that they weren't. You could come up with all kinds of different things. Even if it's the idea that somebody's forced to become. A lot of Richard Matheson's work was of a civilized person who's forced to be uncivilized because of circumstances, forced to get in touch with that, savage part of themselves. Maybe you do that, who knows? But you can find analogs of tropes that, like you could do somebody who is a friend that is constantly putting demands on somebody's time, and they drain them that way. So they're like a vampire. And it wouldn't necessarily have to be supernatural, but you found an analog of the trope, so you can go ahead and write a vampire story, even if other people would never see it. I used a Creature in Darkness Wakes, my novel, I call The Overshadow. It is a vampire, is what it was. I never used the word vampire. I don't have anybody think of it that way. I don't want the baggage. I didn't want the baggage of vampire to come along. So you can disguise tropes too. A lot of times what you do is like you take a trope and you get down to its essence, and then you basically put like a new costume on it. And I can't remember if it's going to show up later in the presentation or not, but the example I always use is of Jason and Freddy. And who else do I use? Pinhead. So Jason and Michael Myers too, because they look pretty much the same. They're characters who have white faces where the features are completely immobile. They don't really have, Freddy doesn't have features, but it doesn't matter. They're dressed in monochromatic outfits, and they wield a blade to take lives. That is nothing but the image of the Grim Reaper with a white skull-faced, black robe, and a scythe. So they are just death. And I don't know if the creators did it on purpose or was a happy accident, or this is why they are the ones that stood out and other killers went by the wayside. Nobody remembers them from movies in the 70s and 80s. But that's why it really, hit a nerve with audiences. They recognize that trope without it ever being called that. I read somewhere, I don't know if it's true, but I read that thanks, Nick. I read that the original script for Final Destination literally had the Grim Reaper as the killer before somebody came along and said, let's just make it the Death Force. That'll be a lot better. Oh, I never read that one, Valerie. I'll have to check that out. So Freddy Krueger is Satan, associated with fire, has kind of a red sort of devilish face. Instead of a trident, he's got his gloves. He torments people in the netherworld. Pinhead's a genie. You summon him with this little it's a box, but it looks like a lamp. I mean, it's even gold. And he's the kind of genie that, you know, is going to bite you on the ass when he shows up. He's not going to give you what you want. Even though he's a dark genie, people still hope they're going to get something from him when they summon him, and it doesn't work out that way. All of that works great because somebody has just taken a trope and all they have done is put new clothes on it. Just combining tropes or elements of tropes can work great. That's what happened when George Romero created his zombies. Whether he did it on purpose or not, he took the ghoul, which was, you know, a human that eats, or a creature that's like a human that eats human flesh. He took the Walking Dead, which used to be just, you know, a voodoo priest or whoever would raise the dead and they would do the priest's bidding. And then he took the communicable disease part from a vampire and he slapped those three things together and he created one of the most effective monsters that our world's ever seen. You don't find too many people that are ever to create a whole brand new type of monster that would go with vampires and werewolves and Frankenstein's monster and such, but he did it. And you could also argue that he did it because a lot of people copied it too. But he was the one who started that. So you can borrow from other genres. So you can look to see what kind of things show up. Like in noir fiction, there's often like a mob enforcer. So what if you took somebody who was the enforcer for, I don't know, a cult. And so there was somebody who goes after cult members that have strayed from the true path or whatever. See if they can get them back on the path, or if not, take them out. And maybe that person's human, maybe they're not quite human, who knows? But basically, you've just taken the kind of idea of the mob enforcer who was, you know, going to try to, you know, get after somebody to get them back in line, and you use it in a horror story, or you could use it in a dark fantasy story or whatever. So you can go to other genres and kind of look at their tropes. There's a website. I should put this website on my PowerPoint. I think it's called TV Tropes, and even though it says TV, it's tropes of all kinds. And you can look up the various tropes and find all kinds of things in there that you might be able to go ahead and pull out and then rework. Yeah, TV Tropes is great. And of course, you can create your own tropes just from your own experience or imagination. Example I always use, and I'm sure some of you may have heard me say it before, write about it before, is that one week years ago, on two separate occasions in the same week, I saw two men walking backwards. One was walking backwards on a sidewalk up a hill, and the other was walking in a parking lot where I was dropping my daughter off for work, and he walked backwards around behind the building. I don't know why. I've never seen backwards walking people since. But, you know, I held on to that image, and I eventually used it in a story. It was a mythos story where the supernatural figure was unmaking reality by walking backwards, almost like unzipping it or whatever, or just reversing it. So I made that trope. I created it. I mean, it's still just an awful thing that's destroying reality, but the image of it, the way it looks and the feel of it's going to be different because it comes from me. And it can come from your own thoughts and your own feelings, your own experiences. And nobody else will ever come up with those. So even if your trope is just something that is dead, that wants to plague the living, if you come up with it on your own, maybe from like a dream you've had or a thought you've had or something that you've seen, nobody else would think of it. You can also come up with tropes that would be like different places too. For example, last week, one of our cats just suddenly died. Looks like he died without any pain at all. We think maybe he had an aneurysm. But we went out to garden centers looking for something because we buried him outside by the garden. And so we were looking for something like a little plaque or statue or something. So that's my latest thing to associate with death. So maybe I would use the lawn center, like where we looked, one of those lawn centers, as a place that I would associate somehow with a story to deal with death. Who the hell thinks about lawn centers as being a place like that? It's pulled from my life. And so then I might have a haunted place. Maybe all the people that come there drag ghosts with them. I don't know. And they get left behind. I have no clue. I'd come up with something. All right. So this next one goes in more detail about the getting personal. This is a big thing that I do. I try very hard to make in my horror, unless I have to write like about a werewolf or something. And then I still try to find a way to put a spin on it. Like if it's a theme anthology and I got to write about a werewolf. Well, Aristotle supposedly said that if you want to connect to the universal, you can only do it through the particular. So you can't write about like a family and just say this is what a family does, and nobody will connect to that. So you write about one family. Not all families are alike, but because there's specific things you're going to write about this family, people can connect to it, at least on some level. So the more that if you can come up with a particular thing, because werewolves aren't particular, they're universal, shape changing. I think Fangoria just announced they're going to have a were-tiger movie. Like their Fangoria Studios' first movie is going to be like a Malaysian were-tiger story, which I am there for. But shape changers, people change into animals. Well, that kind of myth is around the whole world. So the more particular you could get from your own thoughts, your own dreams, your own obsessions, your own observations, the more you're going to be able to create something that has more of an impact on readers. So what are you afraid of? And here I say, what disturbing events have you experienced? But I don't mean you have to literally write about your own trauma. Many years ago, I did a workshop called Personal Horror at the Thurber House in Columbus. So it was James Thurber's house. And everybody was doing an exercise, and there were a couple of high school kids that came. Didn't expect there to be any kids. Should have. Anybody could come. There was no reason why it had to be just adults. I didn't expect them. And one of them decided to write about the trauma that she experienced, a scene where she was being abused. And it was one of the first times, that happened, and we dealt with it the best we could. Hopefully it worked out okay for her. I'm not sure. But I'll never forget the fact that, while the catharsis can be a really good thing, it can also be really difficult for people who think they have to do that. You write about what you want. So when you see disturbing events that you've experienced, it's your choice what to do with them or not to do with them. What current events scare or disturb you, and probably try not to make them like maybe so big. Maybe climate change scares you, or politics in America scares you, or the way people deal with guns in America scares you. That's super, super broad. But if you take the idea of climate change and you make it like just it's really hot, and in this one house somebody's trying to deal with the heat, then you can make it more personal. And maybe draw on a time when you had to deal with heat. I mean, I grew up without air conditioning. So I don't know how I survived. I don't know how I slept. It wasn't easy. But I could go back and draw on those kind of memories. Got heat stroke once walking around at a zoo with my first wife. We were so sick after that. Didn't know about heat stroke. So maybe I'll do that, walk around a zoo. But, I can go ahead and explore the issue of climate change through the particular. If I wanted to do a gun thing, I mean, I did have like a shooting in mall shooting in my novel, Your Turn to Suffer, because I had never dressed that or put that anywhere into a book. And I don't make any great big point about it other than just to put it in there as, one of the things that is awful in the world right now. I'm also careful not to preach about those things. If I try to put them in there, I try to do stuff with them. But if you preach, it just, the little bubble of suspension of disbelief pops. And you're better off just to put it in there and maybe indicate what you want to indicate subtly. And your dreams, I don't remember any of my dreams ever. My wife she has dreams that last, they sound like they last subjectively for days. She dreams gigantic, long adventures. And I wish I did this. I do not. I don't dream anything. She says it's because I dream during the day, my writing, and maybe that is. I just don't remember them. I remember some of my ones from high school, though, and every once in a while I might pull one of those nightmares maybe and draw on. But if you do have an active dream life, I had a friend in college who every morning when he got up, and he just did this for fun, it had nothing to do with his major or his profession, he would write down his dreams. And the more he did that, the more he remembered. And he got to a point where he averaged like around 15, 20 dreams that he remembered when he would wake up. He'd been doing this since like middle school, and he had this giant stack of notebooks he'd bring in, and he had them cross-referenced by superhero or sex or, family members, whatever the hell showed up in his dreams. He had tabs for them all, and he just did it just to kind of, it was cool for him to explore his subconscious this way. And I was just like, man, it would be great to have all that material to write about. I'm way too lazy to try to do that and too sleepy in the morning to try to do that. But I always suggest it to people because if you're like my friend, you might get a wealth of material from that. Stephen King, I read an interview with him a long time ago when The Shining first was published, where somebody asked how he got his ideas, and he said, "I just look at something and tell myself there's something wrong with that, really wrong," and it goes from there. That works great, because if you can just train that on anything, the ice cream truck that goes by, the piece of splintered wood that you find in your yard. You don't know where it came from, but something's wrong with that piece of splintered wood. What is it? Anything. And it works great. Of course, paying attention to the world around you, and either taking pictures of things with your phone or quickly jotting them down in your notepad. I mean, that's where the backwards walking man is what I wrote down on my phone app. And when it's time for me notepad app, when it's time for me to look for a story idea, I will cruise through that. And sometimes I'll pick like 3 or 4 different things. Just finished a story to submit to Borderlands 8. We'll see if they like it, but I built it out of one memory from when I was a kid, the fact that my wife doesn't want me like mowing the yard at this point. I have no health issues that would prevent me. I'm just getting older. And we don't have like a power assist mower. So I put that in there. And I think maybe 1 or 2 other little things. So I often build stories from different bits and pieces. It's almost like a collage that nobody, by the time it's done, realizes is collage. But paying attention is great. Most of those things I'd forget if I didn't record them. And that's why quarantine's been a little bit difficult for me. I'm not out in the world seeing stuff. Find it a little harder to write short stories. Not so much novels, but. So, I don't remember this. I must have added this one. Read a hell of a lot. The more you read in your genre or outside your genre, the better able you are to know what tropes are, to see how different people approach different tropes. On social media, if people are like recommending a book or an author as somebody who does, there's nobody like them, they do all kinds of cool stuff, whatever. And even if you're still, you want to write commercial fiction, if you read people that write literary fiction, a lot of times literary fiction is, they are trying to plow, new artistic ground. And in many ways, literary fiction is like research and development for commercial fiction. People try all kinds of stuff out there, and then we can steal it. So even if you want to write commercial fiction, you may come up with some really cool inspirations from there. But this can work great. I get a lot of inspirations from movies too, especially for images and things. But I seek out ones that are not your normal kind of movie. This one just says, be careful, once somebody comes up with something cool, everybody rushes to do it. And so, if you're the first person to do zombies or fast zombies, when fast zombies first started showing up, you're the first 1 or 2, that'll work great. If you're like the 500th person to do it over the course of a decade, not so great. And a lot of people will do that for marketing because they think they have a better chance of being published. They recognize there's something new there, but it's not your new, and it's not going to stay new for very long, and it's going to become saturated, and everybody's going to be sick of it. I don't know how well self-published zombie stories are still doing. I still see a lot of zombie novels that, as near as I can tell from cruising through Amazon, they're indie published. I don't know how many readers that they have. If you love zombie novels, I would not stop you from writing one, because your love for it, your enthusiasm may create a really good one. But in general, just be careful of the bandwagons. So don't go with your first idea. I usually tell people that your first one, or even your second one, is usually going to be just coughed out of this mire of stuff you've read, watched, from a million other sources. Even people who read a ton have watched thousands upon thousands of hours more of TV and movies. And TV and movies usually are not very original. TV and movies are where ideas go to die most of the time. It's like a graveyard for ideas. When Avatar came out, everybody's like, oh, Avatar. Anybody who reads was like, it's Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's a century old. What the hell are you people thinking this is new? Doesn't mean it's not good, but certainly not new. So keep massaging your ideas until they're no longer run-of-the-mill. Keep playing around with them. I always think of ideas, my own ideas, as 3-dimensional objects that I turn around and look at from different angles until maybe I can find a different way to write about it. So I would take Zombie Apocalypse and keep turning it around. And probably I think it's going to be my next book from Flame Tree. Whenever it's going to come out, I don't know, because I haven't got edits on it yet. but it's about a ghost apocalypse. So ghosts all across the world are showing up. Since I wrote it, I've run into like 1 or 2 movie descriptions about that. So hopefully it won't be a cliche by the time my book comes out. Oh, here's that thing. Look at it from different angles. Now I know why I don't remember this, because I've added a bunch to it. So I've already told you about this part too, that I often take 2 separate unrelated ideas and combine them to make a story. Sometimes I do this just by which bits sound cool. The thing I just did for Borderlands, which may suck and may get rejected, who knows? A lot of my weird short stories are experiments, and I'm never sure. The ideas did not match. The only thing, the big motif of them was fireflies. And the first experience was a kid when he was at his grandmother's house in the front yard with fireflies. The mowing came about just because I thought yard. I can connect them that way. And then, well, if the person's mowing late enough in the summer because it's hot, some fireflies might come out. So I got some fireflies there. So I was able to go ahead and start creating connections between them. Often when I write, that's what I think of doing, is it's like I'm stitching them together and drawing everything tighter as I go. Hopefully nobody sees the suture marks by the time it's all done. But this works really well. And you can take them at random. Like if you have like 20 ideas on the notepad app of your phone or whatever, wherever you're writing your ideas down, take 2 or 3 and slap them together at random and just start writing and start brainstorming and seeing what happens. Right. So you can try advanced fiction writing techniques too. We don't have a lot of time to go into them, but these are things you can go ahead and look up. These are the sort of things that often experimental fiction, in terms of literary fiction, those kind of writers try. Formalism is when you take a different form of writing and make it a story. So it's like it looks like a resume on the page, but it's actually telling a story. Epistolary novels and epistolary stories were like that. They're not advanced because they're an older technique, but they are formalism. Lipogrammatic are stories that play around with language. Metafiction are stories that comment on stories, like a character who knows they're a character in a story, or like in Scream, where they didn't know they were in a story, they were living a story kind of, but their knowledge of stories helped them get through that. Nonlinear, you tell it in all kinds of different ways. Absurdism and surrealism, kind of the same. Absurdism is just wacky, and surrealism is just bizarre images, I guess is the simplest way. Cross genre would be like science fiction blended with mystery, blended with horror. And that can work really well too, to try to come up with different ways, because this forces you into different structures, which will also force you into different like characters and different settings and probably different kinds of threats and things like that too. Let's see what the last one is. Might be about doing an exercise. All right, so I don't want to do an exercise now because it's difficult as hell to do in this kind of format, and because we're running out of time. So here's resources for further reference. So if you go ahead and send me an email, I will send you this thing. So here's a big list of horror cliches. I think they're in movies. Yeah, they're all horror cliches. Gary Brownbeck has a really good book called Teach Their Darkness. And then Seth Grahame-Smith had a book called How to Survive a Horror Movie, which is really, it's a humorous book, but it's like how to tell whether you're in a particular kind of horror movie and then what to do to get yourself through it. But it deals with a whole lot of tropes because of that, including story tropes, because he's like, well, do this, do that, do the other thing, and if you don't do this, you're dead. If you do this, you'll live. And it really gets into all kinds of great tropes that you can use by spinning them, either avoid them or spin them into different ways. And then the last thing just is about me. And I need to update it just a bit. All right, let me figure out how to quit this. Where's the little stop sharing? So maybe that will allow me to go back to this screen now. All right, so we still got a few minutes left. I don't know quite how close to the top of the hour they kick us out, but does anybody have any questions about anything that in the PowerPoint or anything at all about writing or publishing that you might want to ask me? I will take a sip of coffee and wait for something to show up in the chat. You're welcome, Kenya. If you don't have any questions, anybody have any suggestions of writers or directors or whatever that produce work that you feel really, is very original, far from cliche? I'd say David Lynch is even though he uses, you can see influences from like 1950s culture and things like that. I mean, there's nobody like him. Stuff that comes out of him just comes out of him. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Sorry, I got to get rid of Valerie's email notification that just came through. I think it's probably a good idea because it's one of the things, you're pitching to an agent, you're pitching to an editor. If you say this is a vampire novel and you don't say your twist till like 3 minutes into your pitch, they're already thinking, I'm sick of vampires. But if you say, this is a vampire novel and what's different about it is, then they're like, oh, cool. And that wakes them up. So they'll listen to all the rest of your pitch a lot more. It's what I do anyway. Yeah, I think Sam Raimi's definitely one. Watching those two when they first came out, watching Evil Dead 1 and then Evil Dead 2 was amazing, the difference. I was like, what the hell? And but it worked really well. Really kept you off balance too. Anybody else have any questions or comments? You're welcome. Of course, you're welcome to go whenever you want. I mean, we're done with the thing. Make sure you send me an email if you want the PowerPoint. Yeah, Cabin in the Woods, that's metafiction in a lot of ways because it's not only is it fiction about fiction, it places us in the position of these characters that are trying to placate the gods and save their world because we're the gods. It's like we're the gods that are being entertained. And if we either do thumbs up or thumbs down based on whether we like the movie or not. So it actually kind of casts us as those gods, which is really cool. You're welcome, Samantha. Thank you, Catherine. You're welcome, Donna. And you're welcome too, Lori. Hope you found it interesting or useful. Useful is more important than interesting when it comes to this kind of thing. You're welcome, Carol. Yeah, Bentley Little's great. I never know where his stories are going. Even if he uses more of a traditional trope, I just don't have any idea. Thanks, Sally. So yeah, I'd recommend him. I'd recommend the Ignored, where he takes just a simple concept that sometimes people get ignored and spins a whole wonderful. Thanks, Valerie. I'll send you that PowerPoint in just a minute. I'll do it as soon as I'm off here. Yeah, read Bentley Little. You're welcome. I don't want to say Maria. I can't remember if I'm supposed to use your first name, but thanks, El Marie Wood. Your whole name, your professional name. Yeah, that's right, El Marie. I remember now. We talked about that before that one panel. Ian Reed and Blake Crouch. I haven't read them. I need to read them. You're welcome, Nick. Yeah, same. To read you in person, to read your words. I mean, it's really cool that formats like this has created such good access for people, but it'd be nice to be able to see people in person too. Well, I got 2 more workshops to do this weekend, one tomorrow and one on Sunday. So if I see any of you there, I will see you there. Feel free, since I put out my email, if you have any questions about anything at any time, feel free to reach out, or on social media too. Feel free to reach out and I'll do what I can for you. So other than that, thanks so much for being here. And hopefully I'll see you all, or at least read your words sometime later. That's true, Donna. I remember on bye, Nick. I remember on Robot Chicken where they kept making fun of him, where he would just show up and say, "What a twist!" It was never a twist, but he'd just show up in some other sketch and say, "What a twist!" You're welcome, Louise. Okay. All right, I'm going to leave now. See everybody later. I'm going to go send PowerPoints to those of you that emailed me. I'll try you too, Louise.